Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Building Stronger Cyber Resilience, Strategies for a Post-Pandemic World. I'm Deb Snyder, Senior Fellow for the Center for Digital Government, and I'm excited to serve as your host for today's webcast. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have a great session over the next hour. We have a full agenda, but before we dive into the content, I just want to share a few brief housekeeping notes. We will email a recording of this presentation to all registrants within 48 hours. Please feel free to use the recording for your reference and also pass it along to your colleagues. We've designed this webcast to be interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A with us by submitting your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom left of your presentation panel. Please send in your questions as they come up throughout the presentation, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible during the Q&A portion. For those of you interested in downloading a copy of the slides, you can do so by clicking the webinar resource widget at the bottom of the console. Also, during today's webcast, you'll be able to connect with your peers via LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. For those of you on Twitter, please use hashtag GovTechLive to share key takeaways, quotes, and learnings from today's webcast. At the close of the webcast, we encourage you to complete a brief survey about the presentation. We'd really like to hear what you think. If you're unable to stay with us for the entire webcast, but you'd still like to complete the survey, simply click the survey widget at the bottom of your screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, it automatically pops up as soon as the webcast concludes. At this time, we recommend that you disable your pop-up blockers, and if you experience any media player issues or have any other technical problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help button at the bottom of the console. Joining me today to discuss this topic are Dan Lorman, Chief Security Officer and Chief Strategist at Security Mentor Incorporated, and John Zanni, Chief Executive Officer with Acronis SCS. I want to tell you a little bit about these two experts. Dan Lorman is an internationally recognized cybersecurity leader, technologist, keynote, and author. I've known Dan a long time. When I was the CISO of New York State, I met Dan in his capacity as the CISO of Michigan. He led Michigan's government cybersecurity and technology infrastructure teams for 17 years, including enterprise-wide Chief Security Officer and Chief Technology Officer roles. For his Michigan government efforts, he was named SC Magazine CSO of the Year, Governing Magazine Public Official of the Year, and Computer Magazine Premier 100 IT Leader. He currently serves as the Chief Security Officer and Chief Strategist for Security Mentor Incorporated, where he is leading the implementation of Security Mentor's industry-leading cyber training, consulting, and workshops for end users and executives in the public and private sector. He's advised senior leaders at the White House, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, federal, state, and local government agencies, and Fortune 500 companies. Dan has more than 30 years of experience in the computer industry, beginning his career with the National Security Agency. He's also authored 2 books, and he's been a keynote speaker at global security and technology conferences from South Africa to Dubai, from Washington, D.C. to Moscow. You can follow Dan's escapades and government technology blogs at Lorman on Security or on Twitter at @GovCSO. John Zanni has been a leading voice in the cyber industry for more than 25 years. He currently serves as CEO of Acronis SCS, an American cyber protection and edge data security company exclusively dedicated to meeting the unique needs of the U.S. public sector, including federal, state, and local government, education, healthcare, and nonprofit institutions. Prior to leading Acronis SCS, a role he has held since the company's creation in 2018, John held senior positions at Acronis AIG, an international company, including President, Chief Marketing Officer, Senior VP of Channel and Cloud Strategy, and Senior VP of Cloud and Hosting Sales. Before joining the Acronis family, John spent more than 4 years at Parallels and 16 years at Microsoft. John earned his BS in physics from California State University at Northridge. And what I found very interesting was that before transitioning to the technology field, John had a somewhat unconventional start to his career, first working as the chef and manager of his family's French restaurant in Southern California for 13 years. And that's where he learned how to successfully run a small business and interact with stakeholders, skills that have informed his leadership style ever since. So welcome, Dan and John. It's such a pleasure to have you both here with us today.
Thanks, Deb. It's great to be with you this afternoon.
Thank you, Deb. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, so before we move to our speakers, we've got an audience polling question for you. So I'm going to cue that up. And as you can see, the question is, what was the biggest concern for your organization in transitioning to remote work? Was it people issues, such as productivity? Was it process related, such as delivering workflow results and business outcomes? Was it the technology issues like connectivity and devices? Or was it security like VPNs, cyber attacks, home network security? Or was it something else entirely? Give you a couple minutes to respond to that. And then we'll take a look at the results. All right, so as we can see, it looks like technology issues like connectivity and getting PCs, devices out there certainly was something that organizations struggled with, which doesn't surprise me in the least. And then followed by people issues, right? Because people trying to get the work done from unique circumstances such as their dining room table as we shifted rapidly and entirely in most cases to remote work was certainly challenging. All right, so we're going to move into our presentations at this time. And Dan, I'm going to start with you. Bad actors and their cyber attacks are not letting up. In fact, they're growing in volume, if anything, in velocity and also sophistication. And organizations and their security teams are now facing new challenges related to this rapid shift to remote work and new business models, putting everything online and customer facing. And the fact is, these workplace and workforce trends aren't likely to change. So I'm going to turn the program over to you. I'd like you to share your thoughts and observations.
Great. Thank you so much again, Deb. A really good honor to be with everyone this afternoon, wherever you're listening to us around the world. And I want to just share a few slides for a few minutes, kind of setting the stage for John and really the kind of situation we're in. And heading into 2020, we had a record year in 2019 in ransomware. So it was really the year that ransomware kind of stole the show, if you will, for state and local governments. And I blog about trends and, in government, been blogging with Government Technology Magazine now for over 10 years. And really just an explosion in the numbers, again, pre-COVID. And then as we hit into COVID in the last 6 months, the numbers have even taken off even further. So while the state and local governments haven't been hit quite as hard, we've seen a lot of ransomware attacks against certainly research organizations in the healthcare sector, a number of state and local education groups have been hit, and then certainly we're still seeing attacks against the federal government as well. So really, the attacks have just gotten worse. And we think back to 2019, we think about the staggering numbers, and they really are staggering. I mean, it's hard to believe that some of these numbers have evolved so rapidly. So, Atlanta, $51,000 ransom, and then New Bedford, $5.3 million ransom increasing. So the numbers have grown, the targets have grown, state and local governments have certainly seen the brunt of that, and a wide variety of different types of ransomware have hit as well. As we think about heading into the COVID, kind of in March, and all of us jumped to working from home, we really saw with the poll results that Deb just brought up. I kind of find that interesting, but we certainly saw challenges in people, process, and technology in all three areas. The number of phishing attacks has just skyrocketed. We saw that again. This is that's not new, but the number or the amount of attacks is new, and it's certainly grown. Targeted with new names, and I think the big thing state and local governments need to think about when they think about what happened when we entered into COVID is everything changed at once. And anybody that knows technology and security knows that that's when bad things happen, right? When too many changes happen at the same time. Now, granted, a lot of people do like working from home. The productivity in some cases actually, was the same or even better. People say they're moved to working from home and they've adopted and they've adapted to the new normal. But I think as we've seen these attacks grow from working from home, we've seen a number of different data breaches. We're going to talk about that a little bit in our Q&A session, why that we've seen so many data breaches. But, you know, it really runs the gamut. The focus in government, of course, went to unemployment, and there's a lot of fraud because there was a lot of changes with that. We'll probably get to some of that a little bit later. But there's a number of other challenges that people found as far as home security and how do they secure their home environment. The processes change. Find that interesting, Deb, interesting that there was really no zero who said process changes, but I've seen quite a bit of process security challenges that businesses have faced and governments have faced as they've entered into the COVID timeframe. And now as people starting to think about more change and going back to the offices, and I think in many cases that's starting to happen now. I'm seeing more businesses start to head back. A lot of others are saying, no, it's going to be, you know, not till 2021, maybe the end of early next year. Some people say they're never going back. And some state governments have said, you know, we're going to be working from home as a default and only come into the office if we absolutely have to. But the Harvard Business Review and a number of other organizations like Forbes have come out with these checklists. And you'll have these slides. You can look at, you know, some of the things that they recommend if and when you do go back to the office in those guidelines. But I want to just kind of you know, wrap this little section up with, you know, there's so many resources available out there that are really offered for state and local governments as far as whether telework cyber guidelines and best practices. You can certainly talk to NASIO. You got some links there. PTI, Public Technology Institute, which is really looking at local governments. NGA has a whole focus on the coronavirus. NIST has a great website that you can talk about. One corporation here in Michigan, where I'm at, has a great safe work from home playbook, but there's other corporations that have come out with those, and Government Technology Magazine as well, and the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center all offer guides on what to be thinking about from working from home, guidance, best practices, when you think about cybersecurity, technology, and working from home. So these are just some of the resources that are available. And again, these links will be available to you after this webinar. So with that, Deb, just kind of teeing up the topic, I want to hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Dan. As always, your keen observations on the cyber threat landscape are right on point, and the resources and guidance you've just shared on telework practices, very helpful. Thanks so much. Okay, John, let's go to you. The current threat landscape and this massive workplace and workforce shift resulting from a global pandemic, they serve as really good launching points for you to talk about what organizations need to be thinking about in terms of cyber protections, what it takes to build your cyber resilience, and some strategies that help organizations get there. So I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming onto this webcast. I have to say, even as a company and a CEO of a company where we think about cyber resilience and data protection, and day in and day out, this pandemic really had us having to rethink how to operate and operate in a way that is secure. So hopefully through the few slides I'll present here, it'll give you some fodder to think through how you should be operating or could be operating in your different roles and agencies and businesses. So this is more of an example of how we think about it, and then hopefully this will give you a really good start on building your own strategy or adjusting it. A little context, who is Acronis SCS? As you heard, I used to work at a company called Acronis AIG. They're actually the parent. We created a separate independent company uniquely focused on the U.S. public sector. And the reason is because the needs of the public sector really sometimes are at odds with the needs of the commercial entities. So we created this company based in Scottsdale, Arizona. All my employees are U.S. citizens only. We have a very strong focus on certifications, both the products and the processes. And then, of course, we focus a lot on diversity, including being a very strong veteran employer and a veteran advocate through a separate 501c3 that I have to help transitioning veterans and military spouses pursue self-sustaining careers in IT and cyber, where today there is a big gap. So a little background here around the U.S. public sector threat landscape. You can see, as mentioned previously, there's just a massive number of attacks happening in the public sector. 23,000 in 2019, and I am sure that that number is significantly higher because there are no requirements to report, and in many cases people would just prefer not to report. 16% of all breaches are targeted at public sector entities. You're just a sexy target because one, you operate in a mission-critical environment, so there's more of a need to solve a ransomware attack when it happens, which means a higher propensity to pay. And also, even if you don't, you get free publicity, or the bad actors get free publicity, which is also good for them. 90% of the public sector organizations said their employees' data is as sensitive as the people they serve. And I can tell you there's a radical, significant increase in the amount of sensitive data that's now sitting at endpoint devices, sitting in people's homes because they're working from home. And then there's this concern about data breaches or fact that they can go undiscovered for years, and the bad actors can be collecting data without you knowing it, and then figuring out how much has been lost, what's been lost, can be a tremendous burden to you. A couple of, or 4 examples here, and just to give you a set, in Louisiana in December of last year, the city of New Orleans had to declare a state of emergency after computers and website ransomware were taken down. Again, in January in Wisconsin, 2 cities were hit, limiting access to city websites, email, online payments. I don't know about you, but I pay all my services into the city I live online, which means I would not be able to. Torrance, California was hit, bringing their website down, stealing files containing information. And then again in March, the attack on the city of Durham in North Carolina. So the point here I want you to take home is no matter how big or small you are a vector of it, you are a target of attack. The way they attack is very low cost to them, and so they go after everybody, which means everybody needs to be prepared. And then on top of that, recovering from attack can be very, very difficult and very, very costly. Remote work, or the move to remote work, has just exacerbated the problem. First, I have to say I'm pretty impressed at how quickly public sector agencies and groups moved to remote work and implemented that. The SBA went from 0 virtual desktops to 5,000 within a few months. The U.S. Navy went from 10,000 VPN lines to 250,000 lines within a couple of months. The move to creating a secure home environment for telework has one that has happened at a rate that I don't think we've ever seen before. But there are still some challenges, right? The home environment is not managed by your CIO's office, your IT office, which means you're in a more unsecure environment. I have a Atlantic broadband router. Now I changed the password, but it's still a consumer-grade router. Children, others live in the house that have no security training that could be using those devices. Other devices on your home network could compromise the corporate network. Zoom, Teams, and WebEx, all of them were really designed to work in environments managed by an IT department. And now all of a sudden they have to go beyond that. To their credit, these companies have done a lot of work to secure their apps, but we recommend more of a defense in depth approach where you have an overlay of protection on top of that just to really make sure that environment is protected. Some data points here from the Verizon Mobile Security Index. 75% of the public sector organizations say mobile devices are critical. Another 3/4 say it will be their primary means of accessing cloud-based services. I know I use my mobile device more and more every day, and my desktop less and less every day. Over half have experienced a major mobile-related compromise, and 36% admitted they sacrifice mobile security to get the job done. So we're not going to have a poll here, but ask yourself how many of you have switched to Gmail or Hotmail or Outlook.com or another mail, consumer mail account of yours because you couldn't get through on your commercial mail, or disabled VPN because the performance was so bad and you really had to get to that website or watch that webcast. Those are all things that sacrifice security and put us all at risk. So how do we attack this problem? The way we look at it is we think of it as a similar way that you think of hygiene or a virus or illness prevention and treating. And it's ironic that we're using this metaphor in a pandemic. The two are actually not related, but we call this complete cyber hygiene. And so if you think about how you treat a disease, you need these 5 areas to focus on: prevention, detection, response, recovery, and forensics. So prevention, the best way to make sure you don't get sick and bad things happen is you put in good preventative measures, like a vaccination, like good hygiene. You have methods to detect whether you're sick or not, right? RNA, DNA tests, antibody tests, temperature checks, so on. And then if you do get sick, you have the tools to respond very quickly through medicine, antibiotics, other treatments. If it is more serious, you also have methods to accelerate the recovery through surgery, other such procedures to really get you back to be up and productive as quickly as possible. And then throughout all this, you need good forensics to really understand the pathogen and how to deal with it in the future. COVID is actually a great example of this, watching how the scientific bodies are learning about this disease, what research they're learning while it's mutating at the same time. And we do see improvements. Sometimes it's hard to tell from reading the news, but fewer people are going to the hospital. Fewer people are dying. We don't have a vaccine yet, but it looks like we'll have one by the first quarter of next year. And there's still a ton of open questions that these scientists will figure out over time. For digital world, it's exactly the same thing. Prevention, you really have to have vulnerability and patch management strategy. Make sure you have your data backed up with continuous data protection for the most critical data, and really be proactive in terms of your cyber hygiene. Then you need solutions that really detect threats and understand where the threats are coming from so you can prevent them as they're happening. And it's got to be artificial intelligence based. The bad actors have the same access to technology that we do, and they're using it. And then, of course, when something happens, like a virus hits you or a ransomware attack, that you have the tools to block it, to to remove it, and to recover very, very quickly. And then if you do have a major loss, that you can recover also with the minimum amount of downtime. A lot of people don't realize that with ransomware attacks, even if you pay the ransom and they give you the keys, getting complex systems up and running isn't a matter of just turning on your computers and you're good to go. There's a lot of interdependencies between systems and states, and getting them all running and operating again, and making sure you don't charge people twice or not charge them at all, or that you had sensitive data that got stored or not stored is quite complex. And then having the ability for the experts to analyze what happened so it doesn't happen again. If you really think through these 5 vectors here, that's also based off of a NIST framework, you'll be well along the ways. We have a tool which we call the Acronis SCS Complete Cyber Protection. So the way we build our off-the-shelf software product or cloud service is really to design to meet those 5 areas through a combination of safety, accessibility, privacy, authenticity, and security. So making sure you have always a reliable copy for recovery, that you can access your data anywhere at any time, that you have complete control over who can see and access your data, and that you can prove whether data has been tampered with or not. And then making sure that you have the tools there to protect against cyber threats, whether it's ransomware or a virus or any threat, to really mitigate it before it even causes a problem. So whether you choose to use our tool or another one in the market, just make sure it's really covering all these aspects, because any little hole, they will find a way in there. Acronis Cyber Protect is the product. Acronis SCS Cyber Protect is the product. It is AI powered. It was released this year, really designed for edge and endpoint devices that in one interface combines backup and recovery, antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware, and security and management. So it's a one-stop shop for really protecting yourself. It is not the complete solution. There is more you need to do around training employees, making sure your network is secure, making sure your applications you use are configured properly, you're using two-factor authentication. But if you do take a defense in-depth approach, you will minimize the problem. And I can tell you within our company, when we moved to remote, because of that approach, it was a fairly seamless transition. Most of what keeps me up at night has to do with employee morale and keeping people healthy and productive, and how they can balance their work with their life. I mean, we all know working from home, on a good day, it's your cat that walks around across your keyboard. On a bad day, it's your children or your spouse or some other thing that has an emergency while you're presenting, and then you have to obviously go deal with it, and because they're still the most important. I will close on one slide and then we'll move on from there. I talked a little bit about Acronis SCS Vets. If you are interested in helping us or want to learn more about this charitable work here, happy to help. If you are a U.S. veteran and you'd like to learn more about it as well, you can go to acronisSCS.com and look up for Acronis SCS Vets, and we'd be happy to help. There are plenty of jobs out there, and it's just about taking the skills that these veterans have developed in their military career and translating them to what we need in the commercial world. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, John. I'm certain that your guidance on organizations taking the time to take a breath and think strategically about how you should operate post-pandemic, and also the importance of a really comprehensive, well-thought-out approach to cyber hygiene resonates with our listeners, especially given the consequences of cyber attacks on government organizations and the people that they serve. There are just tremendous opportunities to learn from the experiences and lessons from this crisis and to come out of it, if you will, with a stronger and much more resilient security posture. Okay, audience, at this time, we have another polling question for you. So let's take a look at this. What is the first or the number one thing that your organization does today to ensure cyber resiliency? Is it training staff? Is it attending to backup and testing your systems so that you can recover swiftly? Is it applying redundancy in your technology, or protecting and defending systems from cyber attacks through defensive controls, or is it something else? Give you a few seconds to respond, and then we'll move forward into our panel discussion, which I'm very excited to take us through. I think it could be all of those things, but what's the number one thing that you kind of spent the most time on, if you will, to ensure that you had resiliency in a cyber sense? All right, let's take a look at the responses coming in. Looks like, hands down, still protecting and defending systems from cyber attacks, because as Dan, I think, alluded and drove the point home, during the post-pandemic chaos, cyber attackers took opportunity, dramatic opportunity. We saw a tremendous spike in cyber attacks and COVID-related themes, phishing campaigns, and all kinds of activity around that time. And I think people are genuinely more subject to, based on fear and confusion and trying to assimilate all the new technology, more subject to being tricked when things are up in the air. So it doesn't surprise me, but it looks like very closely followed by training staff. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I want to dive a little bit deeper into why that was the case. All right, John, Dan, we're going to move right into our panel discussion at this point. And I want to start with you, John. We often hear the term resiliency tossed around quite a bit. You know, it means different things to different people. But what is it in your mind, and how exactly do organizations measure it?
I think of it in a couple of ways. There's people, if you have people resiliency. So this means how do you make sure that your people can function and do what they need to do given the current challenges? And if someone does get sick, how do you make sure that that function can continue? Because it's important that we continue to operate, and then once they get better, that they can get back to work. And then the other part is the technical resiliency, which is really about what you do when there is a pandemic, or if there is an earthquake, or if the data center where you store your data gets destroyed, or you leave your laptop at the bathroom at the airport and it's gone. So there's really both sides of resiliency that you need to think through, and how do you address them.
Thank you. Dan, let's move to you for the next question. What impact has the pandemic and subsequent influx of organizations leveraging remote work had on cybercrime, in your opinion? I know you talked a little bit about some of the trends. Can you dive a little bit deeper? Were the attacks from within the United States, external? Were there particular types of attacks?
Yeah, thanks for that, Deb. You know, the numbers, it's a global picture. Some hard numbers here, then I'll talk about them a little bit. But the FBI reported that by the late May, the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center had received 320,000 complaints, and that compared to 400,000 for all of 2019. So for less, basically, we're looking at probably double. I've seen numbers around breaches, depending on what surveys you're looking at, some hard numbers. I mean, the FBI numbers are viewed by most as being really hard, but the numbers have exploded across the board, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We're seeing, we talked about I mentioned real briefly, just the number of people applying for unemployment. I think a lot of states and local governments, especially state governments, had to make a lot of changes in their unemployment systems, and obviously with the new stimulus that was given out by the federal government. And unfortunately, I think we're gonna see it. People are gonna look back at this. The reports are already out there in almost every state that you've seen literally billions of dollars in fraud as a result of that. So, the changes, I tell people, what changed? We used to say this in technology when I was CTO in Michigan, stories in security as well. What were the big things that changed? And we've seen changes in, like I said, people, process, and technology. And as those have changed, certainly we've had more breaches. So there's a number of surveys out. I've seen 600%, I've seen 350%. About the number of breaches reported. Certainly the number of phishing attacks has skyrocketed, and we saw some of those numbers earlier. So unfortunately, cybercrime is alive and well and actually doing much more during this pandemic.
Thriving, absolutely, Dan. John, what's your impression of how public sector entities have reacted to telework overall?
Overall, like I said earlier, I was quite impressed with how quickly they moved to telework and enabled such an environment. Because as we know, many public sector entities just were not designed for that. Now, some did better than others. The state of Arizona, where we're based, the CIO Tim Romer did an incredible job with that move. But I would point out a bit to Dan's comment that they have seen a significant increase in attacks into their city. But overall, I would say that their response has been quite impressive. I think we can do more. The sector we've seen the biggest challenge, frankly, is in education. And we know exactly why. Unfortunately, because there's been a lot of controversy of whether schools should be 100% online or 100% in person or hybrid. It's made it very difficult for the IT managers or the IT department to figure out where to prioritize their work, and because they need to enable the students. But my advice would be, you got to make security first, otherwise you're going to be in trouble, and keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's really foundational, but I agree it has been quite the moving target in every sector, but nowhere has it been more, at least in the last month or so, really evidenced as it has been for education. Dan, any additional insights on that from your perspective in working with federal, state, and local agencies?
Yeah, I mean, I think public sector, I agree with John. The reality is that education has been hit hard. Universities have been hit hard as well. But governments, unfortunately, I think I always say there's leaders, followers, and laggards. And we have some really good leaders and some great stories. But governments, in many cases, are low-hanging fruit for the cyber criminals. Governments have a treasure trove of tax data, health data, personal records, driver's license information, and the criminals are following the dollar. So, the reality is that we've seen more attacks against government because, obviously there's been changes with COVID-19 research, a lot of stories, listeners have probably, seen some of those stories about nation states going after research organizations, getting the vaccine information. I mean, obviously there's millions of dollars around that. Election security is another challenge in public sector, of course. It's a whole other session just on election security. But, I mean, the reality is everyone is a target, too. So, I mean, while we have public sector being hit, I think John showed some numbers, 19% or something of the breaches or attacks. I'm not sure exactly what that number was, but the reality is that, it's all of the above, and the public and private sector are getting hit hard. And state and local governments need to be more ready than ever. The other quick point I'd make on this, Deb, is that, it's expectations in society. So, we now have the citizens, our end users, our customers, our clients people are expecting, they can buy something on Walmart and they can follow the shipping and they want next day delivery. They expect more and more things are being done online, and they expect their government to be available online. And so the expectations have gone up at the same time that the attacks and the cyber threats have gone up. So it's kind of a perfect storm, if you will.
Right. So citizens certainly do expect that consumer experience that they are experiencing in the private sector. And trust is the cornerstone of good government. There's no doubt about that. John, let's move to you. What policies for cybersecurity do you hope are enacted or enhanced following, kind of these lessons learned?
So the first policy I would love to see implemented is required reporting for ransomware attacks, because without us knowing how severe this problem is, it's hard for those in the government that fund the solutions to these problems will actually provide the appropriate amount of funding. And so I firmly believe, and I know there are some states that are already doing this or working on this, that we should just require reporting of all breaches. And that would be a great policy. The second part is I think there's a massive need to educate individuals on what it means to have cyber hygiene. And that's going to take time, and it's going to take all of us. People complain because they have to use dual-factor authentication, yet no one complains that to enter their house they have to put a key in a lock or punch a code. Yet the time it takes to do both is about the same. And so education, policies around education and awareness would be hugely beneficial.
Dan, anything to add from your perspective? Those are all great points, and I think particularly what resonated with me was the threat intelligence sharing, so important, and with speed, please, because the sooner you get it, the better you can apply it to your situation. But Dan, anything from your side?
Yeah, I mean, NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, just updated their special publication 800-53, which really addresses kind of the latest update. It hadn't happened since 2013. So if you haven't taken a look at that, it's got new privacy and security control guidance. So I would certainly say that. I think a lot of organizations and state government, cities around the country have, said, hey, we're going to comply with the cyber framework. We have policies in place. I think the challenge a lot of organizations have had now is, are they still relevant? Did we have a plan for the pandemic? A lot of people are like, what are we going to do if, kind of people built, in some sense, in an analogy here, we protect things after they already happened, kind of like build a better barn door after the horses get out of the barn, if you will. So the challenge being, as organizations, what are your policies now? Are they being followed? Are they being used? Are those policies actually being, tested? So if you have a backup policy, John had a lot of good points on backups and the tabletop exercises and testing these different scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? Are you actually doing that? I think a lot of organizations are, and there's a lot of great stories that we hear about best practices, Deb. There's a number of organizations that really aren't. So they may have a policy around backup and resiliency and testing those backups, but they're not actually following them. So I think this is an important moment, as people look forward and what are we going to do in 2021, and people are coming out of the pandemic, as John mentioned. I think people really need to take a look at and right-size what they already have and make sure they are being followed and people actually are doing those things.
I think those are such great points, Dan. So important to learn from our lessons, if you will, and recalibrate and test those plans, including scenarios that cover like situations, and because this is probably not the last of the types of situations that we've been through, and keeping in mind that these are very challenging times. John, what has your own organization, Acronis SCS, done to maintain resilience?
There's a few things. First, from technology, from the beginning, we took a zero trust approach. So all our technology that we use is designed so that you only have, an individual only has access to the information they really need, and that we used secure systems like dual-factor authentication. So for example, even though I'm the CEO, I have no access to the development environment because I haven't touched a line of code in over 30 years, and I'm not about to touch one today. So that's the first approach. And then the second one is really training. Training on resiliency, and that ranges from making sure people have a succession plan in case somebody gets sick, to teaching them not to click on links. Human nature is designed to trust, right? That's what we do, and it would be a horrible world if every time you met someone you started by not trusting them. But the bad actors take advantage of that inherent trust. Like I was taught that it's very impolite to not hold the door open if someone's right behind you. But in physical environments and offices, that's the worst thing to do. Everyone needs to badge in. Same thing in the digital world. We have to not just let people in because we're curious or because we're not paying attention. So we spend a lot of time training, and it has to be repetitive. I'll share a case with you where tied specifically to COVID, we have very specific rules and policies to really keep people healthy. I know we're all getting tired. I miss my team, meeting them in person, but there was a small group in my organization that met together for lunch, and 3 of them got sick. It's a good thing we had a resiliency plan, and we were able to, we managed it. It wasn't a problem, but even with all the training, people will make mistakes, and so you have to have a way to recover from that quickly when it does happen.
Those are great insights and recommendations to keep in mind as we all move forward together. And I think they contribute, John, if you'll agree, to integrating a long-term remote work path and ensuring that they're protected and secure. Are there any other additional things, Dan, that you can think of along those lines, maintaining resiliency, protecting and securing assets as you pivot on this experience and really plan for a long-term remote work strategy?
Yeah, I'll just mention a couple. I mean, I think organizations that are leading the pack, if you will, are repackaging or relooking at their tactical and strategic plans. And so everyone wants to know, what's the world, when are we going to go back to normal? Well, guess what? We're probably not going back to a lot of the things we did before COVID-19, before the pandemic. So what does that strategy look like? You know, what is your strategic plan? What is your tactical plan? Certainly a big part of that is remote work, working from home. And again, I mentioned earlier, in the state of Maryland, a number of different governments have said we're not going back. You know, we're going to be work from home is the default, and then we're going to go back on an exception basis for meetings or certain events and things when that has to happen. So I think, you know, thinking about that piece of it, but also thinking wider about the business. And at the end of the day, technology and security only is as good or as successful as the business is successful. And so looking across government, I think a lot of areas of government are rethinking how they do what they do. We're in the government space, whether that be natural resources, whether that be taxes, whatever it is you're doing, Department of Transportation, whatever function you have in business, or if you're a security or technology professional, how are you helping those business areas think about their processes, their delivery? What does success look like in a post-pandemic area? And I think really putting together those strategies, putting together some strategic plans. I think some states have done that. I know Ohio just put out a strategic plan. I encourage you to go look at theirs. There's a number of other states that are doing the same thing, and really thinking about, okay, what's next and how are we going to deliver that as new technology is rolled out in the 2020s, whether it be artificial intelligence, whether it be, you name it, robotics, all the different technologies are going to be coming out, and thinking about that data collection, data analytics. What does that mean in a post-pandemic era, and putting a strategy around that?
Thank you, Dan. So at this point, it's time to move to our Q&A portion of the program. We're going to take some audience questions. And John, I'm going to go to you first. So the question is this: in these days of Zoom, firewalls, secure emails, sometimes having a strong cybersecurity posture can feel a bit like a hindrance, like it's getting in the way. How do you help bridge that gap between security, adoption, and ease of use?
It is something that we will deal with and challenge ourselves with for a long time. The way we look at it in our resiliency plans is what is the minimum you need to do that's just non-negotiable. So, for example, multi-factor authentication. In other cases, we look at and say, okay, maybe we implemented something that just really hurt productivity to a level where we're willing to take some risk. But it just has to be part of your planning, and looking at each workload and each activity and each role and understanding what they need to do, what they need access to, and how you enable that. But in the end, there will be more barriers because the bad guys just love it when we leave our doors open. I have a UB key for certain networks for me to access. I now have this little hardware key that I'm showing you, but we're not on video, that I have to use to log in. But they're very sensitive systems of ours, and so we took extra work. Do I need to use a UB key to log into my email? No. Double multi-factor authentication is sufficient. So it's really on a case-by-case basis.
So, John, I'm going to stay with you at this point and ask a second question, if you don't mind. We often see tight budgets in the public sector and very difficult buying seasons. How does Acronis SCS adapt to help organizations obtain this complete protection posture right away without breaking the bank of the organization, if you will?
Yeah, the budget question is a tough one because I think there's just no compromising on security. The way we work around it is we really try to understand what their restrictions are. What we're seeing now is a huge move from perpetual licensing to subscription and cloud, so they can get the same benefits, but instead of paying a lot of money up front, they're just paying on a monthly basis to cover the subscription. And so there are creative ways to get around the budget. We've also been known to offer an extended period of free usage to align with maybe a budget cycle. But I've noticed that agencies don't really want free. They want something that's long-term sustainable, and we all know we're a for-profit company, so I can't give it away for free forever. So they rather negotiate something up front that they believe they can manage and maintain for a number of years. So subscription and cloud seems to be the most predominant way to do this. So
that you're taking care of those concerns right up front in the planning. Dan, I'm going to move to you with the next question. The question concerns training, and the question specifically is how important is delivering training to employees on how to effectively and securely work from home? What challenges did you observe, and what did effective organizations do to address that issue?
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I mean, John did a great job with that earlier in the session. I'll tell you, it's vital. I mean, it's so important, and the surveys are really kind of shocking, if you will, around the country with state and local governments. I mean, some have done, again, very well. They've provided training, they've provided hardware, maybe laptops, they were ready. Others, not so much. I mean, I know governments where people were told, literally be out of the building by 5 p.m., kind of mid-March, and it's like, take your desktop with you, and they're like grabbing cables as they're running out the door. And, I know people that have said the help desk has not been very helpful, and they're kind of on their own. My advice to listeners would be, wherever you're at, I mean, I think training has got to be brief, frequent, and focused. It's got to be relevant. It's got to be really interactive and engaging for staff. And so the reality is as you present that material, maybe you already had a baseline great security awareness training program, and now you just need to top that off with working from home and some other content. I've seen a lot of governments do that. Other people literally had nothing, and they're like, oh, this is really important. But maybe in early days of COVID, they thought, well, we'll be back to the office by July 4th or maybe even Memorial Day. And now they're realizing, oh, my goodness, we're not going to be back until 2021 sometime, if we ever go back at all. So they're now taking another look again at their training. And I think you really, again, have to think about people, process, and technology. I keep sounding like a broken record. But, think about your people, and not just the smartest ones, the people who are security gurus and your technology staff may be doing it very well. There may be people in the business areas that have gotten little or no training. They really don't know how to, literally do much in the way of technology, and they need a lot more help with their, securing, as we just heard from John earlier, what is their cyber hygiene in a variety of methods, whether that be, two-factor authentication, VPNs, virtual private networks, or whatever it may be that they need help with. Really, I encourage teams to reach out to those business areas. You say, not, hey, I did it in May, I did it in July. No, you need to do that again. You need to be communicating with them this fall and then as we head into the winter. So it's vital. It needs to continue. It needs to be ongoing.
Great points, Dan. John, I'm going to come back to you with this one because it's specific to Acronis SCS. So the question is, in this time of remote service delivery and a mostly remote workforce, how is Acronis SCS helping build out cyber resilience specifically?
Well, so when the customer buys from us, our products, in many cases, they can implement it themselves with our help. Federal government, it's all done by federal system integrators, so we don't participate there in the implementation and preparing them. But there have been cases where we have had to fly on site to help with an installation. But those are very, very rare, and fortunately nothing bad has happened. They've taken all the precautions. In today's world, you can install a lot of software remotely, and it is, even though it's not ideal, we all like to be in person, it is still a very effective way to do it.
Thanks, John. As we're nearing the end of our program, I'd just like to give each one of you a minute or two to sum up your final thoughts and key takeaways. What would you like the audience to leave here today with? Dan, let's start with you, and then we'll give John the final word.
Thanks, Deb. It's been great being on the session this afternoon. I just would say focus on communication with your staff. I mean, obviously, we've all heard the analogy, if you will, lemons to lemonade. I mean, this has not been a good year. We were talking, Deb and I were talking earlier, she's a T-shirt with thumbs down, right? This is for 2020, that is. This has been a hard year for a lot of people, and a lot of staff are struggling. Some are doing very well. But I really say communicate with your staff, communicate with your technology and security teams, reach out and help those around government that you're working with. Partnerships are so vital. And whatever solution you're offering, don't just assume that it's working. Really get that feedback and then, adjust and then, kind of go through the process again, kind of rinse and repeat. So you really need to be thinking about how you can communicate better with your staff. And I think that's really important, even as we move forward into 2021.
Great points, Dan. John, final words?
Yep. I would want to echo what Dan said earlier, people, process, and technology. You have to really focus on all three of those, or otherwise you won't be completely cyber resilient. And this is an ongoing effort. It's not going to end anytime soon. I agree that we're not going to go back to the world where everybody's in the office all the time. And so we have to adapt to this new reality by really making sure we communicate and train our people, that we have the right processes and the right tools to really complement the work that people are doing to be resilient.
Thank you very much, John. I want to be respectful of our time commitment, so we'll have to wrap it up here. In closing, I'd just like to thank both Dan Lorman and John Zanni for sharing their expertise and insights on today's webcast. What a wonderful, interactive, and just very insightful conversation. I'd also like to thank Acronis SCS for making it possible to have this important webcast discussion today. And of course, thanks to our audience for spending this hour with us. We look forward to seeing you soon at another government technology event. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe and healthy.